We're likely to expect strong support for Ukraine from pretty much all the countries there. For the first time in a while, the Munich Security Conference has not invited Russia. And this is the kind of treatment that, in an earlier era, the fascists in Italy, Nazis in Germany, or militarists in Japan were treated as outcasts. Well, Russia increasingly is being treated as an outcast and not being invited to this conference. So I think we'll see the conference provide really enthusiastic support for Ukraine, and this will help lift Ukrainian morale.
Is it a forum in which decisions could be made about what Volodymyr Zelensky wants, which is supplying more ammunition and in particular jets?
The forum won't make decisions, but it can influence decisions. So, for example, President Zelensky has urged the provision of Western combat jets. That issue could be taken up, but there'll be discussion of other issues. For example, to what extent are ground-based air defenses effective, perhaps more effective in some respects than combat aircraft? Right now, Russia has not been able to gain air superiority over Ukraine, even though Ukraine only has a limited number of old MiG-29 aircraft. This testifies to the power of ground-based air defenses. So there are multiple considerations.
Okay, we'll return to that in a moment, if you will, because I think there's the other things on the agenda that I'd like to talk to you about. Just staying with Ukraine, though, for the moment, Belarus's leader, Alexander Lukashenko, has said today that he stands ready to aid Russia in another offensive from his country's border. He's done that before, of course. Do you feel, William, that changes the likelihood of that happening?
Not too much, because he said that essentially Belarusian forces would not be involved in fighting in Ukraine unless Ukrainian troops entered Belarus. Well, Ukrainian troops are not going to enter Belarus. No need for that. So he is basically using that language to define, before he meets with Putin, some limits on what Belarus will do.
Right. So he feels compelled. I mean, he has, of course, allowed Russian forces to launch an offensive from that border before. But now, what's happening here there that he now feels compelled to put that caveat on it?
Well, the idea of fighting in Ukraine is very unpopular in Belarus. And Lukashenko probably worries that if he caved in to Putin's request, that he would increase the risks of an elite coup d'etat against him. And public protests against him as well. So he's trying to balance a fine line by allowing Russian forces to operate in Belarus, but not to provide a new Russian air base, which the Russians have been asking for, or to involve Belarusian troops fighting in Ukraine.
Okay. The West have already imposed sanctions on Belarus. Does this intervention warrant more or a response of some sort?
It's not yet clear that this is going to be a significant aspect in Belarus's participation in the war.
Okay. We've seen Sir Keir Starmer in Kyiv today, William, the opposition leader here in the United Kingdom. He met with Volodymyr Zelensky. How important is that a moment, do you think? A commitment from the man who could be the next prime minister?
Well, the visits of Western officials to Kyiv have been very helpful in bolstering morale in Ukraine and in showing other countries in the West how important it is to be supportive of Ukraine. So Great Britain has played a really leading role in supporting Ukraine in this war. And so it's quite helpful to encourage other countries in Europe and elsewhere to provide more support to Ukraine.
Okay. Volodymyr Zelensky gave an interview earlier to the BBC. He said that he doesn't believe that he does believe that Ukraine's forces could keep resisting Russian advances until they feel that they're able to launch a counteroffensive. He, of course, wants more weapons from Europe to do that, obviously. How realistic is that, them holding that, holding off Russia's advances?
There is a question how much Ukraine should be devoting forces to resisting advances around Bakhmut, which is a target that Russians have been pushing for, but really doesn't provide any great strategic advantage to Russia if Russian forces are able to take it. So some, I think, believe that it would be wiser for Ukraine not to devote so many forces there, but rather concentrate more on preparing for their own counteroffensives. But President Zelensky seems to be keen on trying to hold on to Bakhmut in order to send a signal to Russia that Ukraine is resisting.
Is that unwise?
There are trade-offs.
And they are...
I'm sorry?
Sorry, the trade-offs are what?
Yes,
Exactly?
so there are trade-offs there. So it's hard from a distance to judge some of those decisions, but there are trade-offs.
Right. On reflection, do you think that Volodymyr Zelensky will view his visit to Europe last week as a success?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And the visit to the United States. In both cases, he was on a thank you tour to express gratitude for the support and to also use those visits to encourage countries to provide more weaponry. And he hasn't devoted much time and attention to that kind of travel in the past because he's so busy at home. So I think it was actually a wise use of his time.
Okay. Take us back to the Munich Security Conference, if you will, William. This really important, significant gathering of world leaders. Of course, the war in Ukraine will be high up the agenda. I think there'll be perhaps fewer other things discussed. What else should we look out for?
Well, there will be other concerns about China, especially. China's wolf warrior diplomacy, as it's called, the extent to which China may be gearing up for some kind of military activity in its own region. China is building up its nuclear forces. It looks like China is seeking to develop a nuclear weapon capability comparable to Russia and the United States. In the past, it had a much smaller nuclear force. So there are a variety of issues, including also, I should say, theft of intellectual property. So there will be discussion about the threat from China and to what extent should sanctions be applied to China by the West for technologies that might have military purposes.
Right, okay. Are China going to be present at that meeting?
I'm sorry?
Will China be present at the conference?
Yes, I believe so.
Right. And so those conversations, they'll be had directly, will they, with China?
So there will be speeches at the conference, some of which may be a bit more elliptical because China is there, but the message will get across. And then there will be private discussions, what are called bilaterals, between specific world leaders and also maybe small group discussions as well. So there'll be a variety of ways to convey those concerns.
Okay. And I suspect, of course, that the suspected Chinese spy balloons will be at the centre of those conversations, won't they? President Joe Biden making a statement on that just in the last couple of hours or so, saying that he makes no apologies for shooting down the balloon, and that the initial one that they shot down was used for surveillance. China say it's weather surveillance. 3 other objects that were shot down over North America were unlikely to be foreign spy crafts, we are told. We're told that Joe Biden will also speak to President Xi Jinping about this to try and get to the bottom of it. How do you expect, William, that conversation to play out?
Well, President Biden will probably offer President Xi Jinping an expression of concern. But at the Munich Security Conference, I would not expect much attention to this issue. There are many broader issues regarding China that are also important for a lot of other countries that are going to be at the Munich Security Conference. I don't think most countries see Chinese spy balloons as one of the top issues.
Okay. Domestically, though, it's clearly a hot issue at home, isn't it, William? And Joe Biden is under pressure to release more information about the balloons. Should he?
It will depend to some extent on what would be the risk to loss of sensitive collection information. So it's hard to know. But this is not a spy satellite, and spy satellites tend to be highly classified. Information about how they operate is extremely sensitive and not released publicly. This is much less classified, most likely, so we probably will see more information.